Hey, I want to let you know this conversation involves some adult topics about sexuality and trauma, so viewer and listener discretion is advised. Hey, thanks so much for stopping by the Carline Conversation podcast. I'm Jason, and today I'm talking with Dr. Tony Angelo. Dr. Tony Angelo is a clinical psychologist. He specializes in forensic psychology. For nearly 20 years, he's worked specifically with convicted sex offenders in the state of California. But before his time in forensic psychology, he was in ministry. He first met his wife, Pamela, when he was doing mission work in Jamaica. The Angelos now have been married for more than 30 years. They live in Southern California near their 2 grown children and 2 beautiful granddaughters. Our conversation covers a lot of ground as Tony shares his unique insights from his career as a clinical professional, but also as a husband and as a father. We talk specifically about the importance of that parent-child relationship and how impactful that is to a child's sense of self and worth. It was an impactful conversation for me, and I hope it will be for you as well. Thanks again for stopping by for another Carline Conversation. Tony, thanks so much for being with me today. I really value your time, and thank you for making the time to be on the podcast today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, tell me, if it's possible, in like 1 to 2 minutes, of how does someone born in Oregon, lived in California, lived in Jamaica, most recently here in Alabama for a couple of years, who you spent time preaching, you've been in the mission field, you're also a forensic psychologist and have built your own practice around that. Can you kind of give folks that don't know you a little background of who you are and kind of how you've come to where you are today?
Yeah, so the moving part all around was definitely being a preacher's kid, a little bit like being a military brat, right? Is my dad had spent 30 years preaching in Oregon, and when I was 17 years old, we moved to Southern California. And he spent about 2 years there until I graduated high school. And then he took my mom and moved to Jamaica, where we had been doing mission work for many years. I spent a semester in college and realized I didn't want to be in college. I wanted to be at summer camp is really what I was looking for. So I decided to follow my parents to Jamaica. To their horror, I will tell you, actually. And my dad actually had said, he's like, well, you're not living with us. So I ended up in the mountains of Jamaica with a friend by the name of Travis Kimball, and we spent a year up in a small village in the mountains of Jamaica with no running water. We cooked on a tire rim.
That's a little different than summer camp. Well, not too from some of the summer camps around here.
It was, it was a summer camp on steroids, I guess, like real hardcore camping. But we were out every day setting up and having Bible studies with people and just really honing, I guess I would say, a real love for the Lord and just his people and meeting some of the most, what I guess you would just refer to as simple people, but wise in many instances. And my life was definitely forever changed by that. That second year, after that first year up in the mountains, my dad realized that I was actually serious about what I was doing there. And he said, well, you know what? I could really use you in Montego Bay. So went to Montego Bay, and in Montego Bay, in the big city there, began to see people in every phase of life, meaning a lot of mental illness in particular that was just out on the streets. And I really developed a real curiosity. I wanted to understand that. I was kind of like, what is this? And that really started my interest in psychology. I didn't intend to end up as a forensic psychologist. This was never part of some grand scheme. Ended up just taking undergrad courses and realized there was more to learn and just kept going and kind of here I am today. And all of it really revolves around a curiosity of wanting to know, how does the human mind work? What motivates us? And so here we are.
That's right. That's really interesting how one thing just kind of leads to another, not necessarily starting out with the end destination in mind. You're just, as a teenager, you're trying to find fun, then you find substance, and it kind of builds from there.
Yeah.
In your practice now, how long have you been a forensic psychologist?
I guess it's coming up on 18 years.
Okay, so
About.
imagine in that time, you've seen just a complete wide array of folks and people in different situations. I know we've talked in the past a little bit about some of your group therapy sessions, and some of your patients are what I guess a lot of people would say is sort of the worst of the worst of society, oftentimes, at least from a sentencing standpoint. They're not there because they want to learn who you are. They're there because of a court mandate, oftentimes.
They are. Yeah. So I run contracts now for the state of California for individuals who were arrested and convicted of sexual crimes. And so that runs the gamut of anything you can imagine. And in some cases, what you can't imagine is all there. Somebody who simply got mixed up in something, maybe online, and was convicted of a crime, to someone who is a serial rapist, has, in fact, been serial killer, in fact, that involves sexual crimes as well. We see it all. And so, yeah, we have seen all that that a human being is capable of. That's for sure.
That's interesting, because your job then is to peel back the layers beyond the sentencing, beyond the label of what they did, to try to get to who they are. And that's oftentimes I find a lot harder to do. There's so many headlines, especially now in the digital age with social media, where a picture is associated with a certain title, a headline of this person's serial killer, this person's sexual deviant, or something along those lines. It's really easy, I find it in my heart, to they're just an evil person. And they will always be evil in my mind. Once tagged, always tagged. As that. I guess I'm curious, in your line of work and in talking to these folks that have been labeled that by society, by a judge, by a jury of their peers. At some point, do you get to see a different side of them? And as we just talked about how different events in your life led you to do things that are a net positive for society, some folks have had instances along the way that they didn't intend to end up where they were, but it did lead to that because of negative influences and that sort of thing. So how do you kind of reconcile that, particularly as a Christian? And we'll get into the parenting side of that here in just a minute. But how has your faith informed your practice, I guess, is the basic question. And then the opposite of that as well is, how does your practice inform your faith as you get in these conversations with folks?
Yeah, I certainly have said to many, many of my clients that God intended much more for you than where you are. And the vast majority of our clients are, in fact, people who are, I guess I would use the word, redeemable in that way. They are people who, through whatever circumstances life meted out to them, found themselves in these circumstances. It's a pretty common story, right? It's a pretty common tale of abandonment, of childhood abuse, of all those kinds of issues that led this person to the circumstances that they found themselves in. So there's also the road back from that. And I always would say that my faith has informed my practice in that way, that for the vast majority of you, I would tell a client, I believe there's absolutely a road back to where you can be the person who you see yourself as, because very rarely do you find someone who is sitting there saying, I think I am just an evil person, and that's all there is to me. The majority of people would like someone to see a little bit deeper as to who they are. So from that standpoint, my faith very much informs that. I think it has been what has allowed me to sit in the room with a lot of the people that I sit in the room with, and not see them for just the things that they have done, but for the person that this is someone created in God's image, who clearly things went terribly wrong. But that doesn't mean that I can't offer you some form of respect and appreciation as a person that may help guide you back from this.
Yeah. How much of a person's adult psyche is impacted by how they're treated as a child?
Yeah, tremendously. I always say, and this applies across the board, is I always say we are all dealing with everyone else's inner child unless that person has really, really done some really significant work on themselves, has gone to a place where like, hey, I am able to see all these things about myself, and I pulled this all apart and worked all the pieces. And, short of that, we're all dealing with one another's inner child to some extent. What happens with the folks that I work with largely is often the abuse is so significant that it has led them to say, hey, whatever these emotions are that I have inside me, this feeling of, they may not even be able to identify what the emotion is because they're little. It might be a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old who's like, whatever this thing is that's pulling me towards this, let's say this man, my father, gets me hurt because he beats me, because he does these terrible things to me. And so it doesn't take much longer than 4 or 5 years old before they start putting that emotion away, whatever that is. They don't want any part of it, because whatever it is that's drawing me to these people in this affectionate manner, I want nothing to do with, because that seems to get me hurt. So all of us navigate the world through our emotions, ideally. I mean, that's what we ought to be doing. If our emotions have been well honed and respected and so forth, then they guide us through life and they help give us information about one another. People, are you safe? Are you not safe? Do I trust you? Do I not trust you? So to these individuals, most of whom end up in a criminal setting, it is because when you cannot rely on emotions to guide you, there's really only 2 ways that remain, and that is physical violence. I'm going to physically control you to get what I want, and that certainly does happen. But the other and the most common form is when I'm not good with my emotions, or I don't have access to my emotions anymore, then I am going to manipulate you. And that's where most people engaged in criminal behavior are expert in manipulation, because I'm not using emotion. And so to get what I want, to navigate the world, I have to try to get you to do what I want, and I'm going to manipulate you to do that. So that's, the vast majority of the time, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're dealing with in this population. So for probably a year at the beginning of treatment with the population that I work with, is just repeatedly telling them, do you see how this is a manipulation? I'm going to reflect this back to you, how you're manipulating me, because I know what you're trying to get. I understand what it is you need, but the way that you're trying to go about doing it is a one-way street, because this is all about you trying to control behavior. So,
yeah, I've heard it said that everyone copes, but not everyone copes well, or in a healthy way, and that seems to be sort of the case, is that what you learn in your thought processes as a child is largely what you take into adulthood and informs the adult that you become.
Definitely.
So as a parent who is trying to shape our children's thinking into the lens of the gospel, through the lens of the gospel, into the image of Jesus, what are some things that you've seen in your experience both as a parent, but also as a forensic psychologist? What are some of the most important things that a parent can do to give their kids a sense of self, to help them to have the tools to cope when things are difficult, and then to be able to navigate the God-given emotions that he's put in us, but to navigate those in a way that glorifies him and creates a healthy, emotionally equipped person later in life?
Yeah, I love the direction of this discussion around this, because it's just such a big topic. There really is so much we can discuss about this, because there's no question that a parent has an incredible influence on a child, especially early in the child's life, when we basically teach them that the world can be predictable, that it can be safe, that you are competent to navigate the world, and that you are someone who is loved and you're cherished. Now, balancing all that without creating narcissism in our kids, right? Or placing them on pedestals, which I think is something that we have seen happen fairly significantly, is, little Johnny couldn't possibly be wrong because little Johnny is on my pedestal.
Teachers and bus drivers and other adults are not inherently on that pedestal. They kind of have to earn that, but the kid by default, and I hear that a lot from my friends in education where they're climbing an uphill battle, not just with the kid,
Yeah.
because the parents won't listen that their kid did something wrong.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I think that one of the main takeaway messages that we will discuss about this today is we also need to be the first place that our children have to go to contend with rules and boundaries and the idea of what's true and what's not true, and that we need to parent in such a way that we are providing the right amount of obstacle and the right amount of difficulty to our children as well. Because it is easy. The path of least resistance is, of course, to just place them up on the pedestal and just go with the flow. Yeah. And but that is not doing any favors to our kids, that's for sure.
That's the adage, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I do feel like striking that balance today is particularly difficult in a social media age when you can get such an oversaturation of any one particular element of what you're saying, of either promote your child too much or the opposite direction. Whatever the algorithm spits out that you're seeing on repeat sometimes throws that balance off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That's forming how you see the world as well, even more so than the Gospels sometimes, at least more pronounced and more regularly. So as a parent, I have 4 small children, and each child is different. Each child needs something differently from me.
Yeah.
It feels overwhelming at times. You don't want your kid to become a serial killer, and you definitely want to contribute to that. And so I guess for parents that are in the midst of it right now, particularly if a parent feels guilt for how they've handled a certain child or have had that feeling of overwhelming where, man, I've done this all wrong. What hope or what encouragement would you give to those parents that are trying to sort of recalibrate at different stages along the life stage of their kid?
Mm-hmm.
For a parent that has teenagers or preteens maybe that are before they leave the house, is there a way for them to sort of correct their behavior? Which is a really vague, open question, so it's an unfair question. But just, I guess, what encouragements would you give them from the standpoint of continuing to help their kids form their identity, beginning with God and coming out from there? That God is the center of their identity, and not, as a parent, not the things you've done, even towards your kid, or the things that your kids do. That's not their identity either. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that question quite makes sense.
Yeah, well, it kind of led me a couple of places, I think, is one, none of us have done it all right. My wife used to always say the definition of parenthood, in particular to a mom, is guilt. Like, you just feel guilty about everything. Right. She's like, you just feel guilty. Like, oh, I'm not doing enough for my kids, or I did it wrong, or that type of thing. But I think specifically to the parent who maybe has a teenager where they're looking back and saying, I wasn't present, or I think I did a lot of this wrong, and I'm struggling with this kid who I'm just not quite sure how this is all going to turn out, or where they're headed, or they're angry at me, is first and foremost is to just own that. Kids are pretty resilient ultimately, but they also they benefit from sincerity as much as any of the rest of us do. And I think to just simply say some of those things to them is to say, hey, I feel like I could have been better. I feel like there are things I could have done differently. I struggle with that. It hurts me to think that I could have done more for you. But I'm going to do the best I can with the time we have left, and here's what I think that means, and here's what I'm going to do. And I think the other piece of that is to also, none of us, I won't say none of us, that we don't always love to hear what we've avoided trying not to hear. Did I say that right? Yeah. We don't want to always hear the truth.
Exactly.
But asking your child as well, I'm talking about teenager, we're not talking about a 4-year-old here, right. But if you have a teenager and there's a struggle going on, is to say, I want to hear it from you. Tell me what you think I could have done differently, or because that can be a real conversation starter as well, is to say, I hear what you're saying. I might not agree with everything you've said, but I hear what you're saying, and can we, work together to do this a little differently, because I'm going to give you the best I've got for the time that we have left. Because I think that in the end, what our children want is they want a parent who they respect. And they don't respect, none of us do. We don't respect people that we just walk all over the top of. People who don't tell us the truth, right? We can sniff that right out when we know someone's manipulating or someone's not telling us the truth. And so my main encouragement to parents is to realize your child wants to respect you. And if you're already a ways down this road where things are tough, it's going to be challenging because they're going to call into question whether or not this is real or not. We're just going to do this for the next few days and then we'll all go back to normal. And to realize you're going to have a struggle there, but to stick with it and say, I am going to contend. The word I like is to contend with you. I'm going to contend with you over this. I'm going to do what I believe is the best thing that I can do for you. I always love the distinction in the Greek of love, right? Mm-hmm. And agape love is what I'm going to do for you in this instance. I'm going to give you what I think is best for you, and I'm just going to stick with that because that's my job. That's my obligation. So just because I haven't always done it doesn't mean that I can't start now. And I think that's probably the primary thing we have to do as a parent when we're in that struggle, is to say, hey, I'm going to give you the best I got, even if it's just moving forward from here.
Yeah. There was a sermon that was incredibly impactful I heard years ago before I was a parent about broken parents, basically. Mm-hmm. And Dr. E.R. Brandon was the one who spoke, and he said that, when you think about it, no one has perfect children.
Yeah.
God only has one, and he's created all of us.
Yeah.
Is my unfaithfulness a reflection of God's inadequacy? No.
Right.
And so his point there was, oftentimes as a parent, we'll take on too much responsibility when it comes to the guilt.
Yeah.
The shame of that. And
definitely.
I find that a lot of people, I guess this goes back to our first conversation about being able to cope at an early age or given the tools to cope. A lot of people walk around life with a ton of guilt and shame.
Definitely.
And that then is what guides their actions. Mm-hmm. That is what impacts their relationships. And I imagine that those are the kinds of things that land someone in jail for some of these violent crimes that don't make sense. It's hard to connect a 3-year-old to the person that 3-year-old becomes.
Yeah.
Right, through their actions.
Well, and really of interest is to the person who has committed the crimes. I will tell you, the vast majority of the time, they have not made this connection. Mm-hmm. They don't see it at all. I will say, hey, I remember telling a guy one time who told me his mom was a prostitute, which is troubling enough. Right. But dad was kind of in and out. And then he said, I got up one morning for breakfast, 6 years old, was asking his mom, where is dad coming today? Or is he coming over? Or is he here? Or what? And he's like, no, your dad went to Arizona. And he's like, well, when's he coming back? She's like, he's not ever coming back. And that was just it. That was the end of the conversation. Wow. Never talked to his mom about this ever again. And I told him, I said, well, it seems pretty clear to me why you're in this current circumstance, which, some relationship to all those kinds of things. And he said, well, I don't think so at all. And I said, you don't think that your mom being a prostitute and your dad abandoning you had anything to do with why you're doing some of these things? And he was like, I mean, not really. I don't see how that, I don't sit around thinking about my childhood. And so people often don't make the connections. I will say this as a general principle, that we're not great, any of us as human beings, typically, of always fully understanding our own motivations or the buttons that are being pushed in us. Oftentimes it's actually the feedback of others that we have to really receive, because we'll learn a great deal by receiving that feedback from people. But in terms of the parenting issue too, the other part of that we were kind of getting to was, there's a business book called Radical Candor, and I just love that phrase. And I think that's a big part of it is, opening up that line of radical candor of like, we're just going to be really truthful and really blunt, because I think more than at any other time, we have, as parents, are operating in an environment that is very unusual. And social media is absolutely, the major part of that.
Right.
And so, being willing to not just take like, hey, are you getting any inappropriate stuff in your feed at all? No. Knowing that that's probably not true.
Yeah.
And saying, I'm not really actually going to just take that answer. And this is part of the contending with our kids, is to say, well, I'm going to look in your phone. Because sometimes parents will have this, well, that just feels like such a breach of privacy or those kind of things. Well, yeah, that is precisely what that is a breach of privacy, so that we can keep our kids out of some real trouble, because the algorithms are designed to draw them in and to addict them and to corrupt them. And so we have to be willing to take those extra steps, I think, to really say, whether it upsets you or offends you or not, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, it's all from the company standpoint, it's all in the name of engagement.
Yeah.
But as a parent standpoint, it's all in the name of saving my child's soul, and helping them, violating that privacy intentionally, but with purpose, and to draw them to, I'm trying to teach you how to think, and these private places. If it's just you and your thoughts, that's one thing, but it's not just you and your thoughts.
Right.
It's not as private as you think, because the entire world now is having access to you. I'm the only one that doesn't have access to that part of you as a parent. And that needs to be reversed for a long time.
Yeah.
The people that people that you are connected with, truly connected, not networked online, but the relationships that you are geographically close to and relationally close to, those are the ones that need to have the greatest access intimately. But instead, we allow these algorithms to kind of cultivate that.
Yeah, and so many of these topics are things we really don't want to know that our kids are viewing, might be seeing. I mean, we now know, the latest research shows that 67% of young girls have viewed pornography. I mean, prior to social media and the internet, that was a tiny, tiny number. It really didn't happen typically that girls would view pornography prior to the advent of social media. Now it's coming through their feeds, usually starting in a more benign form, maybe under style topics, things like that. But 67% are now making their way into some form of semi-frequent viewing of pornographic material. Almost 90% of boys. Well, I don't really want to know that. I mean, truthfully, I don't really actually want to know that. I don't want to think of my children as having viewed that kind of content and have that, affecting them. But I have to want to know that. I gotta get to the place where I'm gonna find this out, because I'm not going to let you just go down that road without a fight from me. Right. And that kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier about our children ultimately maybe not loving it at the moment, but respecting it later. Right. And I think that is what is so important. I'm going to have to realize that I may go through a period of time where my kids are not always really happy with me, but I'm doing this for their benefit, for their good, and in the hopes that one day they will respect it and come back around to realize, hey, man, Dad, Mom, I remember years ago, boy, we were at it, but I am so grateful for what you did and that you didn't let me just go down that road without a fight.
My friend Mike Winkler used to say he called that from like 15 or 16 years to about 23, 24, the dark side of the moon phase.
Yeah.
They go around the dark side of the moon, and then eventually they start coming back with that exact same progression of rationale like you're talking about.
Yeah.
As you were talking there about people not connecting events, and particularly traumatic events, to their behaviors, I couldn't help but think of King David with Bathsheba. It wasn't until he was directly confronted by by Nathan the prophet.
Yep.
You say, no, you are that man.
Yeah.
here in this illustration, you easily condemn the offender. But in your own life, it took him the entire story before he actually made the connection there.
Yep.
And I think that's a great illustration of humanity.
It is. Yeah. From a therapeutic standpoint, we often say what a client needs is a new experience, a new emotional experience, not just a new understanding, because it's easy. And again, the path of least resistance is to intellectualize something. So I can talk to you about it. Psychoeducation, let's call it. I can give you psychoeducation all day long. Like I could have given King David psychoeducation to say, when you take another man's wife, I mean, that's a really bad thing, and he'd be nodding and saying, oh yeah, no, definitely. It's a horrible thing. That's the intellectual side of it. And I can acknowledge that. But what changed him, as you're saying, was the direct confrontation that made it a new experience for him. You are guilty of doing this.
And there was a prior relationship there, some context there. So I feel like that part for parents is important to remember as well, is that if you do have a relationship with your kid, then there's some relationship equity. If you're nervous about it, that relationship equity should hopefully span whatever hesitations we have for the sake of their souls.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to grow that equity as the years go by, too, because of that respect they will have for you. Look, it is a topic talking about matters of sex and especially pornography, these kinds of things. Again, it's not comfortable to talk about, right? In my own practice, when I first started doing the work I do, I would say something to an offender, like, especially let's say I have a child offender, and I might say, do you, and this is an adult content, masturbate to images of small children? No, I don't do that. And I'm sitting there going, well, it seems odd. I'm pretty sure that you probably do. But as I got more experience at it, I would start saying, when you do this, what are you thinking about when you're doing that? Because I need to understand in that particular setting, where is this person going with this? What's the need that's being met? What is his interest particularly? Because we need to get down to that. But I'm no longer starting from the place of giving you this space of, are you doing this? It's when this happens.
You've moved into your Dr. House phase of everybody lies, right?
That's right. That's right. And because these are such uncomfortable topics.
Right.
And I think there's maybe some advice there for parents is to say, hey, when this content comes across your phone, what do you do with that? Or how did you, what's it making you feel like? Because I imagine it makes you feel some sense of shame.
I imagine that also as a parent, it doesn't give you a way out either.
That's
if
right.
You say, do you? And they say, no, like, okay, well, I tried.
I tried.
I give myself the easy way.
Because I'm really hoping they might say no.
Exactly. Then that gets me off the hook.
I'm off the hook because I really don't want to go into this whole mess.
I think the narrow way and the broad way that Jesus talked about apply to parenting as well. You can take the easy path and those paths of least resistance, and it is a lot easier in some ways, but the end result is destruction. And there's nothing easy. There's nothing convenient or comfortable about where that road leads. The difficult, narrow way full of uncomfortable conversations is where we want to end up with our children as well.
Yeah.
So I think maybe there's an encouragement in that also.
Definitely. And, it's also by shining a light on these things that often provides someone the opportunity to be like, I am so glad actually. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. I am ashamed, but man, am I glad that the light got shined on this because I really wanted to stop this behavior too. I didn't really know how to get myself out of this, and it did become somewhat addictive. And I would find myself, the things that I want to stop doing, I just couldn't stop doing, right? The things I didn't want to stop doing, I couldn't help it. But, so I'm glad you did that. I'm glad somebody had the courage. And I'm probably most glad it was my parent who did this and stepped in and did what needed to be done to help me, to get out from under the weight of this.
I think parents would be shocked to hear how often teenagers say, I do want to get off of my phone or get out of this addiction.
Yes.
And probably any person who suffers from an addictive behavior want to stop. They want to get out of that. They just oftentimes don't know how, or they don't have the people around them to continue to encourage them in that pursuit. And so they just fall back into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's one quote I actually heard this morning driving into the office was a Mark Twain quote that says, "Nothing so needs reforming as other people's habits."
Yeah.
Of course, to me was a connection to Matthew 7 with speck and beam, but I think that's kind of fits into a little bit with what we're talking about here as well, is that what I project on other people is a combination of how I see myself or how I've learned to see the world through this lens that it's my perception, but my perception may not be the reality of the gospel. And as a parent, that's ultimately what I'm trying to get my kids to understand at every age, every stage of life, is the gospel is that's our lens for seeing the world.
Yeah.
And so I see people, when I see a headline of someone who's done something horrible, my first response can be to sympathize or even empathize with the innocent person who's been harmed. But I feel pretty strongly as a Christian, at some point my thoughts also have to come back to the offender of why? What happened to you to cause you to do that to them? And I feel like more often than not, it's a long, nuanced, complicated answer.
Yeah.
And social media doesn't really allow for long, nuanced conversations.
No.
It simplifies things. Sometimes 100 characters or less is not the best way to express deep thoughts. And people are complicated. We all have the capacity for good and for evil. And so as a Christian, I think that as a Christian parent, I want to think that way, but I also not just want to articulate that to my kids instruction-wise. I want to also show that. I want to live that and model that in some key areas.
Well, I think too, if you probably have similar experiences in your life, I certainly know that I do, where someone had the courage to confront me about something I needed to be confronted about. And I didn't love it at the time. Maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a friend, who knows who it may have been, but somebody had the courage to say, hey, kind of like Paul said that, he confronted Peter to his face because he needed to be confronted. Right. I'm sure Peter didn't love that at the time. But I'm sure he also said, thank God for Paul and his willingness to have confronted me. Same thing in my life. I have several instances in particular that I can reflect back on where I'm like, I'm really grateful for this person who confronted me about that thing at that time because I needed someone to do that, because I had given myself, and really I will just say this, that recent research, cognitive science research, tells us we are inclined to give ourselves virtuous explanations for our behaviors. That's a whole other topic for another time probably, but just suffice it to say that if somebody doesn't kind of provide us some feedback and maybe confrontation, I am likely to continue in what I'm doing and give myself virtuous explanations for why I'm doing it. So, our willingness to do that in this context for our kids, and not just take a no, that's not happening, and really push and really dig down and really contend with them over this, will be something they will greatly respect later. May not love it right now, may even be angry with you. And that has to be okay, because sometimes we just have to play that role. I think about it, I love, I'm extrapolating here from Colossians chapter 2. But basically he's saying, why would you accept these facsimiles of the thing that's most real? Why talk about festivals and drinks and, all these kinds of ritualistic things when it's Christ who is the center of all things? And Colossians chapter 1 tells us, of course, that Christ is preeminent. He is the one that we will be perfected in and presented to God perfected. When, of course, the reality is we're all going to get there by stumbling through the mud and the darkness and through our own clumsiness and sin and all these other things. But that we don't want to leave people with a shadow of things rather than teaching them to hold on to the thing that is absolutely most real and true. And that happens through the process of iron sharpening iron, of confrontation, of digging down, again, in the context of us and our kids, of being nosy and pushing our way into places and saying, you are so important to me that I am not going to just leave you to hope. I'm not going to just leave you to, I figure that probably is some content he's seeing, but he said, no, I'm going to push and I'm going to dig down there and I'm going to walk with you through this. And I'm going to, in the process of doing all that, lead you to the thing that is true, which ultimately is Christ. And we're going to go through that process together. And it's going to be tough and it's going to be hard. And I do think there's an added challenge to parenting today that most of our parents didn't face with this world that just exists. And I mean, we put it all on a phone, right? Literally, this access, a portal to the whole world, every good thing, but every evil thing is literally stuffed in our pockets. And it is a unique challenge that we have to be up for. So,
yeah, that I don't think previous generations, no one had the vision to prepare for this. No one could have the way that it's happened. But we do now have some data. We do now have a generation or two of folks that we can look back and say, okay, these decisions did not age well. So how do we correct the future? And as social media changes and morphs into this AI-driven world, whatever the post-digital age is going to look like, I do think God equips us to be able to faithfully navigate. And we've kind of moved out of that calibration period as parents, and now we're into a generation of parents that have their own experience with these things and have had their own identities and sense of self manipulated greatly by strangers and math, these algorithms out there. So I do think that we're better prepared to parent this next generation, having had that experience, for better or worse.
Yeah, for sure.
I am so grateful again for your time. I'm grateful specifically for the work you're doing and the people that you reach in your professional space, but specifically with the gospel being the way that you see the world. So thank you so much for taking time to share some of that expertise with us. Any final encouragement to parents? Anything outside of what we've covered?
No, other than I think I would just say share in this together, because all the other parents around you are going through the same things, maybe sharing some of the same feelings of shortcoming or not living up to what we need to do. Just rely on each other, and we're all in this together. So
I think that's a great exhortation. If someone would like to reach out to you at some point and has questions for you, what's a good way for them to reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. They can email me, I think would probably be the best way. I don't know if we want to put that in a link somewhere.
We'll put that in the show notes there. So if you want to reach out to Tony, feel free to check that out. And appreciate everything that you're doing for the kingdom, and specifically there in your field.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Hey, thanks again so much for listening to this episode of the Carline Conversation podcast. If it's been helpful to you, please follow and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. It also helps if you'll take a moment to rate the show. It goes a long way to growing the podcast. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share or suggestions for future topics or guests, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook,